Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Davis. I am the Sept PIO here at Kentucky Emergency Management. Thank you for joining us today. We have a good presentation. We've got a couple of speakers joining us today. I will be monitoring the chat throughout. If you have any questions at all, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question directly. If you don't want to do that, you can ask your question in chat and I'll make sure one of the speakers sees it. We have two speakers, as I mentioned today, Dustin Heiser, the Assistant Director of Operations here for KYEM. Dustin was hired in 2022 to be the Assistant Director of Operations for Kentucky Emergency Management. In his role, ADO Heiser is responsible for the day-to-day programmatic operations and overseeing the Emergency Operations Center activations. ADO Heiser has worked in emergency services for 23 years and held various respected positions during that time. He began his career as a firefighter in 2001. Heiser holds a BS in Fire Engineering and Technology from EKU, an MS in Safety and Security and Emergency Management from EKU, and is a certified emergency manager with the International Association of Emergency Managers. We also have Dr. Charles Harris today. Charles Harris, or Charlie as we call him, started work at KYEM in October of 2022 to help guide the implementation of the National Qualification System, or NQS. In the Commonwealth of Kentucky, this initiative was subsequently called the Kentucky Qualification System, or KQS. Prior to joining the KYEM team, Charlie served 37 years in the Kentucky Army National Guard as an intelligence officer, receiving 2 Bronze Stars, a Combat Action Badge, and a Legion of Merit, among other recognitions. Charlie is a graduate of Transylvania University, the National Intelligence University, the University of Charleston, and the University of Kentucky. His doctoral research in part examined the acquisition and importance of soft skills to success in the workplace. He is married to Megan, a pastor, and has 3 children. So right now, I am going to turn it over to Assistant Director of Operations, Dustin Heiser. Dustin, the floor is yours, and you may begin.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate everybody being on. I think we got a great crowd. Dr. Harris and I are kind of just going to work through what this KQS is, what it means to you, why we think it's so important. And throughout this, I know, as David said, just send your questions in the chat. We don't have to wait till the end. Honestly, I probably prefer if you do have questions, you bring it up at that time, put it in the chat, and we can answer it kind of as we go there, because as we're talking about that particular topic, it'll be good to just be able to hit that or hit it on the slide we're talking about. So don't hesitate to do that. Again, thank you all for being here. At this point, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Harris and get us rolling on the slides.
Woohoo! I appreciate that. Folks, at the beginning, I just want to say I want to thank you for what you do, looking at the names and all the experience and all the important jobs here. Thank you. And it's an honor to be with Mr. Heiser speaking with you today. And I wanted to, if I could reinforce something that Dustin said about this being more of a conversation than a presentation. We would really like to interact with you and receive feedback as we go and questions as we go through, and not just wait till the end. If you look at our pieces to our puzzle here, you know, at the end we'll have time for questions, but I think the best question is the one that's asked when it's thought of and before other thoughts get involved, and then we postpone it. And if you're at my age, and you'd probably forget it until the next day. So maybe we could do that. I was listening to a radio station on the way here, and then someone called in and said that they were a long-time listener but a first-time caller. So I guess with you all, we are long-time admirers and first-time presenters. Maybe that's a good way to look at us here today. So when we start out, we're going to first define what KQS is. And I know some of you know a lot about KQS. Some of you may know less than that, but we're going to sort of start at square one here and take everyone forward with it as we begin to see the program in total. Now, experts tell presenters like Dustin and me that we're going to lose some of you all here in about 5 or 10 minutes because of work conflicts, because of things that come to your mind. So if we have one shot to get the gist of this presentation, this is our early slide that kind of talks about what we're all about here. And so basically, KQS, or the Kentucky Qualification System, it's the implementation of the National Qualification System, or NQS, in Kentucky. And there's 54 flavors or versions of this as you go through the states and territories. All the states that want to continue to receive a particular kind of funding from FEMA need to implement NQS. So KQS is our implementation. And it's focused on two things right now: incident management teams. And I think here in the Commonwealth, we've seen their utility in a recent tornado in Western Kentucky and the flooding in Eastern Kentucky. I think even for disbelievers, the importance of IMTs has really rung true. EOC assistance teams is also the other area of emphasis. And we're working that with FEMA Region 4 states to create in the future teams that could help each other's states at the state EOCs at this moment. So if Alabama needed help at their state EOC, they may request trained folks from Kentucky who would volunteer. It would be mandatory. This is not a mandatory program by any means. So if you're listening right now, like, wow, do I have to do this? The answer is no, you don't. Our implementation of it, though, Dustin and I, we have to implement that because for many reasons, jobs are one of them, but to get the money, we have to implement it. And plus it's a great idea. And if you don't believe me now, maybe we can convince you of that by the end of the presentation. Now, there's really 3 steps in this process. There's qualification, certification, and credentialing. And I'll look at qualification first. Prerequisites completed, there are classes that you need to take. And I think we probably have taken most of them here. Your 100, your 200, your 700, your 800, 300 and 400. And then also position-specific training. If I'm going to be a safety officer, to take that safety officer course. And then the second part of that qualification is a position task book completed. And that's where I have to show, if I'm going to be on an IMT or EOC assistance team, I have to show competency. I didn't just book learned it. I'm able to apply that. And my mom was a school teacher, and it's just kind of similar to that. That's a profession as well. Emergency management is a profession. And so my mom went to college and graduated with an early childhood education degree. And then she was placed, when she graduated, under an experienced teacher so she could learn how to be a good kindergarten teacher. And then after about 10 years, guess what? It was her turn to supervise a new teacher coming out of college and be their mentor. And that's kind of what we have here. The certification system, and we'll talk about how we do that. That is a peer review system. This is a peer review system. There are boards that will look at a packet that you will submit, hopefully, and they will approve you. And then you will get something called credentials. And that's from the authority having jurisdiction, which in this case is the Director of Emergency Management. And that consists of an identification badge and a letter. And we're not at this level right now, but I would say years in the future, if another state wanted help from us, they would probably ask for credentialed folks on IMTs and EOC assistance teams. Now, there's some good things about this too. For us, not even thinking about that, is that if someone's credentialed, you know that they have gone and taken all their classes, and they also have performed in that position and have showed competency. So that kind of gives us an insurance policy too, and I don't know about you all listening, but I've been in a position where I've been set somewhere and I did the best that I could, but I wasn't really fully trained. I was a lot better trained when I left than when I went. But this is sort of to mitigate that somewhat, where we began to build a team of people that want to do this. Now, this is a voluntary program of the folks that are credentialed.
And folks, we're already seeing those requests come through. So when Hurricane Debbie came in, and I recall Florida, put out a request for a type 3 incident management team. And it lays out, hey, the positions they're requesting, as well as the, that they're credentialed. And we'll talk about it more here in the upcoming slides, Charlie or I will, but we'll touch on kind of like how we know that these other states are working and are willing to take what we have as our KQS system. Also going back just a step real quick on things, any of us that were in the fire service or emergency medical services, right? You took a written test and then you went and you did practicals, right? And you had somebody stand there and say, okay, you can efficiently do that. That's kind of what the PTB is, right? You're going out and they make you throw the ladders, they make you, drag the hose, roll the hose. Same thing here, right? They're just gonna, put you through those paces in a real disaster or in an exercise and kind of put you and see that you're able to do those things. Gonna talk a lot more about that coming up in Charlie's further slides here, but just kind of give you that quick snapshot here in the 5 minutes before we lose everybody, So the incident management team, I think, majority of you that I see on the call, and as I look through David's roster, probably know what this is, but the incident management team is a rostered group of ICS qualified personnel, right? From a command and control standpoint, the command and general staff for sure, probably even a few other of the unit leaders. We look at, comms is probably an important one. Sometimes the resource unit, situation unit leaders, those are probably some additional ones that we are pretty confident would be requested. We've had a lot of requests with liaison officers, and that's not just out of the state, but it's in the state. I know those were vital in the flood responses, and some of you probably played that role as we went through that. And then there's the typing determination, being that we would work on mostly, state-run events. We'd be type 3, but that doesn't mean that eventually somebody won't bounce up or move up to a type 2 or type 3. Obviously, that's based on the situations that a individual has to work through. Many of you know that our floods and our tornado situations in 21 and 22 were both really considered type 1 events. So, somebody would be working towards, could have been working towards, had they already been signed off towards that. The big struggle in this entire process is we do not have a great access to folks that are already credentialed, signed off, type 3, whatever position you want to imagine, right? There's 76 PTVs on FEMA's website. There might even be more across all different disciplines. Obviously the IMT focuses on those 26 that are part of a bigger command and general staff. But, there's also other things eventually that KQS could branch out to in the mitigation world, in the recovery world. That's probably down the road. We're going to focus on EOC assistance teams and incident management teams right now. Not to say that won't be something in the future, so. All right. David, you gonna handle that or you?
Can do that. I'm gonna launch a poll. Hopefully this will pop up on your screen, and what we're really wanting to know is, have you had an incident management team ever deploy into your county? There we go. Somebody's seen it. There we go. We'll just give you about 20 seconds. We got 15, 16 people, 18 people. %, 85 have answered.
Yes, so.
All right, so looking like we're looking at 86% answered. 19 of the 26 people that answered said no, they have not. 3 did say that they have had one in their
Yeah.
county. So
So-
there you go.
So those of you that said no, I hope it's because you just haven't had to have a disaster where you had the need. Let's go with that. But if there is a need, right, we want you to understand what those are and bringing those folks in for the 3 individuals, I think it was, yep, that said, hey, we have, hopefully it has been somebody or been a group of people that in essence made your job as, and I think most of the folks here are either directors or deputy directors from what I saw on the list. Hopefully it's made your job a little bit easier, right? You can focus on the big picture and the incident management teams there kind of work all the day-to-day, the issues, the problems, the challenges, and get you answers so that you can be the decision maker. Understand that if an incident management team comes to your county, your city, your incident, it is not their job to take over the incident. You are still you and your judge executive are still the responsible party. What they're there to do is help you manage the scale and the complexities that come along with that. And hopefully they can bring that support, making you able to just focus on the decisions. And they can kind of bring those decisions to you and, to the table and say, hey, here's what we have. We think here's a solution. Here's some other solutions we looked into. This is why we think this one's the best. In the end, we know the EM and the judge executive are gonna be that final say because they're the responsible party. They hold the purse strings. And they're the one either appointed or elected to those positions. So we understand that completely. But that's kind of the goal there. And we've seen these be supportive in events, big time. We saw quite a few of them out in Western Kentucky for the tornadoes. We've used them in Martin County for the collapse we had there of the coal facility. We had them at Rockcastle supporting that incident with the train derailment last November. So again, and this doesn't always have to be, we see this big organizational chart like you see on the screen, right? That's 26 people or 26 spots. Not to mention, not counting any of the operations pieces, right? Once you get down to below ops section chief or staging area manager, those below don't count in that 26. Remember, we don't have to have all 26. When Rockcastle and we had some support in Rockcastle, we only had another 3 or 4 people come down at a time because that's all that situation dictated, right? We needed a few more hands to manage some of the documentation and help us do some planning and stuff, but it didn't require the 26 folks that you see on this list. So everything's scalable, everything's manageable, and we're gonna continue to look at how KQS falls into this kind of stuff. So. All right, another question.
We have another poll. Have you ever deployed yourself and been part of an IMT team?
Ooh,
Much different results on this one, Dustin.
about 50, well, we were at 50%.
Not quite 50, but a lot more.
Yeah.
40%.
Awesome,
So that's 29 of 31, so excellent. Yeah, we've got, and there's 30 of 31. So 11 people have deployed, 19 of 30 have not.
Good. So again, maybe preaching to the choir a little bit on this stuff, because some of you have been there and done that. And I know again, looking at the list, I know a few of the people have probably deployed with me, or I know in situations they've deployed to. So yeah, again, this is another mechanism. And I'll tell you, this is what we're looking at KQS is kind of be this feeder for our incident management teams across the state, whether they are, regional or they're by the area, or they're just, a couple counties working together. Again, we're not gonna dictate how that operates. That's between you or your area managers or, or a group of you counties that will work together. But you can see, right, how these are beneficial. And then we're trying to take that step, one step further with putting some credentialing to the 40 some people or 40%, sorry, the 40% roughly that said, hey, I've gone somewhere. We're trying to put a little bit of a credential behind your name with that. So that's where KQS is going to fall in. Again, this is something from my standpoint, prior to even being here at KYEM, that I think has been vitally important to this. As we evolve as emergency management, as a state, how we can support each other and knowing that this, somebody is credentialed. Again, I'll kind of state as Dr. Harris did, this does not mean if somebody says, hey, I don't want to go through this KQS process and be qualified. That doesn't mean somebody can't use them as an incident management team member, or you could have a whole incident management team. And I'm looking at just a few people on here, right? Nee says, hey, I've got an incident management team. I'm going to pick on Nee. Says, hey, I got an incident management team, but none of us really have the time or the opportunities to get qualified. And Tim's like, hey, Tim England's like, yeah, I'll still have you respond to Boyd County, and Tim calls on Nee to do that. We're not going to say that can't be done. That is not what this is about. Again, this is voluntary. We think this is a good way for us to continue to evolve in our profession, as well as the skill levels of those that do respond, and to have something kind of behind when you call on somebody. If you want a qualified team, you know what you're getting. You know what I'm saying? And that's not taking away anything that, because there's a lot of good teams. I responded as an unqualified person. Hopefully the folks I went to were happy with what they got out of me. If they didn't say anything. They didn't say otherwise. Maybe they told you guys, just not me. But, so that's what this is overall looking to do. Again, we'll go to the next slide there, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. So what are EOC assistance teams? I think most of you know what incident management teams are. The EOC assistance team is just a team similar to an IMT. Not going to be a lot of differences, but there are some differences. But their focus is responding to another EOC to support a jurisdiction in their EOC operations. We see the incident management team typically maybe going to like a candle factory incident and being centric to that. We could have IMTs respond to EOCs, but once we kind of work towards this evolution, we hope that the EOC assistance team will kind of be that centric piece that goes EOC to EOC. We are starting first with the state EOC. So you see 8 positions there. I think there's 20 in total, right, Dr. Harris?
Yes, sir.
So there's 20 in total. Dr. Harris and I a little bit have worked with the other Region 4 states to identify what we think are the 20 most important positions that we would need to trade between EOCs. So right now, the focus for state EOC or for EOC assistance teams is on state employees supporting another state EOC. We eventually want to, and I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself.
you're doing great.
If we are, we'll.
No, you're doing great. This is wonderful.
We'll figure it out. But what we eventually, our next step we want to do is there local emergency managers, directors, deputy directors, support staff that would like to support KYEM in KYEM's EOC. And would they like to be credentialed and support us here at the state EOC? Is there locals that want to help out at the state EOC, but also be deployable to other state EOCs?
That's right.
And then eventually, is there local emergency management directors who want to qualify their staff to be able to go help another community in their EOC and vice versa? So that's kind of the evolution. Right now, like I said, we're focused on state employees with this one. State employees to go to our EOC or to another EOC. I think this evolution is going to move fairly quickly. The challenge we have here is, and again, if you're familiar with it, if you've been on FEMA's website with the PTVs, the position task books, they're just not as mature. I think there's 18 to 20 of these position task books where, like I said, on the incident management team, there's 70 some, maybe even 80 across that discipline. So it's a lot more developed than the EOC side of it is. So Dr. Harris has been working really hard with the FEMA Region 4 teams, so all 8 states from FEMA Region 4, to kind of look at, hey, how does Kentucky support, South Carolina or Florida or New York or North Carolina, whatever, and then vice versa as a potential a potential situation runs into this. I can tell you, there is a really high opportunity for Kentucky to go to other states. Just in Debbie, we saw requests out of South Carolina and out of Florida. And I'm sure we're going to see them, again and again. So we're excited about this, but that's kind of that evolution as we're working through this and what our goals are. I'm not going to get in front of QRBs right now, but when we get to QRBs, you or I will talk about, kind of how those are laid out. And when I say QRBs, qualification review boards, how those are laid out to kind of support what you see here on the screen.
That's a perfect segue to our next slide.
Okay. There you go.
So the authority having jurisdiction for the issuing of credentials for the 54 states and territories is the KYEM director in most states. And for us, that's our emergency management director. And then the director receives assistance from really 3 committees. And the first committee I'm going to talk about is the advisory committee. And if you look at the box on the right-hand side of your screen as you look at it, the advisory committee is really the strategic piece of this process. The advisory committee has members from other state agencies, for example, like KSP, forestry. It's really an interagency group and sets the overall direction. Was really involved in writing the standard operating guide for KQS, which was published earlier this year. And then, as Dustin mentioned, below the advisory committee, if you will, are the qualification review boards. And so we talked about this being a peer review system, and the peer review is really done in the IMT QRB and then the EOC assistance team QRB. And I was looking for an analogy, and maybe a close analogy is to the legal profession here, is that if I graduated from law school, I'm going to show my competency of the law, by taking the bar exam. And that bar exam is reviewed by attorneys with lots of experience. And that's the same that we look for here, is that model, is that the QRBs review packets that come in for approval for credentialing. And so that setup of a QRB reviewing packets is across the whole nation. Every state has 1 or 2 QRBs, and sometimes the QRB is the advisory committee, or they may call it a steering committee. That term is often used. Sometimes it's one and the same, and sometimes they're separate boards and committees. But so this is really, the KQS is really larger than KYEM. That's one of the takeaways from the slide, is that this is your qualification system. It's not mine or Dustin's or the directors. This is our qualification system. And to make that come to pass, we have to have everyone's participation. And we do that through the QRBs and the advisory committee.
Mm-hmm. So let's touch just real quick on what's the makeup of the qualification review boards, because I think this is important. It is of high emphasis for me and Dr. Harris that yes, we're talking today to emergency managers. I think we might even had a fire chief or 2 on there. I think we had somebody from Katy Department of Public Health. This is really about people across all kinds of disciplines. This is not centric to emergency management. We hope that you could be our kind of assist us in that communication and getting it out there as we go through this process. But if you have a road supervisor or a road foreman that knows logistics and is willing to go do this training, the minimum requirements for training, they can be on this incident management team and be KQS qualified. So I say all that, but we have asked folks on the qualification review boards, we've asked for folks who have those kind of many different disciplines. So we've got, law enforcement representation, we've got transportation, roads construction representation. We've got folks from the Department of Public Health. I'm sure I'm missing a bunch. And some of you are on here that are even on those review boards, but we really tried to have folks across as many different disciplines as we can imagine, because what I didn't want to see was somebody puts a packet together, they turn it in, and there might be some training that is centric to that world. I've never been in law enforcement, so there might be some training that's centric to law enforcement that I don't understand from the fire side or EMS side of things, but somebody who has been there say, yeah, well, your training here is really this equals this training here, no matter what the discipline is. And so we wanted to have somebody from those different disciplines.
That's right.
So that we had that knowledge on the review boards So if those packets came in and we have that, training or experience that maybe some, the majority of us are not familiar with, we've got somebody there that can kind of speak that language specifically and communicate it to the rest of the board. And so there's an understanding of how and why that person fits in. So, I mean, I know there's an individual that's on Northern Kentucky. Well, there's two I know of. One's on the road department. He works for the road department. One's now a city administrator, was their economic development specialist. Not really anything to do with emergency services, had a desire to be in it, respond to it. We want those folks just as much as we want, the folks that are on these calls, so.
It's right, no, great explanation. So, at the very core of this, an individual, and again, this is a voluntary process, will prepare a packet and we'll submit it to the QRB. And I think Dustin did a great job talking about the QRBs really have subject matter experts in them. They will review that packet. Say, for example, I want to be a credentialed as a safety officer. So I'll put together a certification packet for safety officer. I'll send it to the QRB. If I want to be on an IMT, I'll send it to the IMT QRB. They'll look at it, hopefully approve it, send the recommendation to the advisory committee who will review it, sort of a higher level review, and then goes to the director, and then director gives final approval and credentialing back to the individual. And I know it's very simplistic, but that's how the process works in every single state, including ours. And the packet, it may sound overwhelming, and one of my goals here today is to alleviate stress and to let you know that one of our jobs up here is to help you get your packets through this. Is that basically your packet has two things. It has education. You've taken all the courses that you have needed to take to be credentialed, and then you have that experience that you need to have. And that's really all there is to it, to that process. This is I think a complicated slide, and I show it really that this is a complicated program to get going. We are creating a qualification system where none existed before. So we had to create those committees. We had to create policies and procedures. And so I sort of highlighted the standard operating guide in the SOP that was published around mid-February of this year. It took us for about a year to write that. We went section by section, and some of you all listening today participated in that. Thank you. It was a big lift, but we got that done, and that provided kind of like the guidelines and the framework for us moving forward. I want to talk about the QRBs. The first QRB, the IMT QRB, was formed in 2023, really because the IMT community in the state was ahead of the DOC assistance team because of the 2 Type 1 disasters that we recently had. In January of this year, though, we formed the DOC assistance team QRB. So that was a very necessary action too. And then finally, our whole goal, and the reason why we're here presenting today, is that by the end of this year, we would like to have packets before the QRBs. And I'll say it again, by the end of this year, we would like to have packets before the QRBs. The QRBs are ready. The procedures are in place. There's been all kinds of great supporting actions, like Jennifer Hitch, the state training officer. She has really worked hard to have position-specific training in the state, like the planning section chief, operations section chief. She's working on liaison officer-specific training here for the early winter, late fall. So everything is sort of falling into place, but that's our goal, is that we would love to see packets by the end of this year. So why is KQS important? We added that piece because I really get that a lot, not necessarily from folks that are here today, but sometimes people that are sort of on the outside of it looking in ask, why is this really important? So here's a couple reasons right here. I mentioned early on about federal EMPG funding. That is critical funding for our state. Number 2 is that I would imagine in your role, someone may ask you about this program. And so you participating today and learning more is excellent and can help us market the program and have more folks that are certified and credentialed in positions. And then kind of like this is an ongoing professionalization of the emergency management field and our state EMC. We're continuously improving this profession and also where we are here in Frankfurt.
Yeah, so just as we talk about here, number one, I want to make something pretty clear, and I think a lot of you probably have heard this before, but I want to make it clear. This is a requirement for MPG on KYEM. This is not, as of today, and I don't think KYEM plans on putting this requirement on the locals unless FEMA makes that a requirement on us to make it a requirement on the locals. But right now, this is only a requirement on the state. This is not a requirement for you as local emergency management programs to implement at the local level. So I just want to make that clear. That does not affect your EMPG or your EMA funding. It affects us receiving that. That's why we're in this and that's why we're doing this. But also know that they gave us 3 years.
Right.
We're in year basically 1.7, 1.8, depending how you look at that. And we are far ahead of what the requirement from FEMA is. So there won't be any issues with that. You know, they don't require, I don't even know if they require receiving PTBs till the end of year, or till the end of year 3, if I'm not mistaken. So we're way ahead of that. That it won't be a problem for us. Charlie's done a great job in getting us down that road, but I want to make that really clear, right? It's a requirement on KYEM, not on you as a local. So again, you know, just kind of how that funding goes, you know, we receive around that 2 million in EMPG funds gets put into the EMA grant or in the EMA program. That's where that money comes down to you. So we've been getting about 5.5 in FY 24. We got just under $5 million. So we're gonna be talking about what that means to you. That, like I said, that'll be discussed. The director and I will have a conversation or communications with you on what that means. Right now, we're operating in that EMPG $23, because remember, it's always a year behind. But right now, we're operating off that 5.5 million. We split that by 2. You guys get roughly 2.5 or 2.75. We get 2.75 to operate off. And same goes for 24. Just know that, you know, we got cut from the federal side right at 550,000, I think, give or take 520,000. Know that to EMPG as a whole is usually at about 350 million. I think they took a 30 million pay cut on EMPG as a federal government, as FEMA as a whole. And honestly, if you've seen the news or anything about that, anything in Homeland Security took a 10%. So this is why we saw it in EMPG, but you're seeing it in the Fire Act grants, you're seeing it in Homeland Security grants. Everybody took a 10% cut across the board and all that funding from the Homeland Security side of the world. Again, don't forget to ask questions if you have them. We're gonna keep rolling, but if you have questions, please let us know. Go ahead, Charlie.
So, another reason why we're here, and if you remember a couple slides back, is that we were beginning to actively market KQS. And we've sort of had I guess I want to say a soft opening. We've created sample packets and have showed them to the IMTs and have talked about it. But we have sort of ended what we call the soft opening. And now we're moving forward. We spoke about this at the KESC, for example, I guess it was last week. And we're here today, and we'll keep on moving forward. We talked to public information officers, I believe, here in a couple of weeks. And again, our goal here is by the end of the year to hopefully have some active packets and have some people credentialed. That would really make us happy out here to get there. I want to talk about, a profession. Usually has 2 aspects of it, and I apologize for this gross oversimplification, but it's a body of knowledge, and then you have to be able to apply that body of knowledge. So if you're a firefighter, and Dustin, correct me, you're gonna go to firefighter school, and then you're gonna be put on somewhere where you will understudy with a seasoned firefighter and learn your trade. In the same way, if you're a law enforcement officer, a school teacher. And so that's kind of what we see here with the IMTs and the EOC is beginning to consider what we do here as more of a profession, where there's a body of knowledge. I also want to say, when you think of professions too, you think of national standards. There's national standards for fire. There's national standards for teaching. There's national standards for attorneys. And so we also see that these PTBs are national standards. Now, states can add to them, states can modify them a little bit, but that generally speaking, those tasks in the PTBs are the national standard on how they are performed. What I think is also important to us too is that this leads to certification and credentialing. This is a process that leads to something that is an achievement and shows professionalism. I think right now, if I've had planning section chief, I've kind of fulfilled that role. I think I can do that, but I'm not certified or credentialed right now. And so I think with that process comes a recognition of someone who's completed the process that they have mastered, if you will, or are competent in those tasks and skills, and then can therefore be relied upon. And this is like a big picture one, and I hesitated to put this in, but in my lifetime, if you look back and look at magazines and journals of the early 1970s, the 60s, you don't see really the term emergency management. You know, FEMA was created in 1979 with the Carter administration, and EMI had its first class in emergency management around 1981. If you look 20 years ago, there may be a handful of emergency management programs, and today I counted about 180 when I did research for this presentation last month. So this is a field that has really, you know, grown up in my lifetime. And, you know, it's always a question, does art follow the real world or vice versa? But some of you who are my age remember Emergency in the early 1970s. And that really caused a sensation. It kind of showed the emphasis more on first responders and emergency management. That was part of the trend that ended up with FEMA being created in 79, the Hatch Act, and just a whole plethora of actions that have really built the emergency management first responder profession that we know today.
The rest of us, Charlie, just watch the reruns.
Still watch the reruns. And this is my main piece, and Dustin, we wanted to add this last because this is really about you all, but it really means increased support to local partners like you. At the end, you could get an IMT now, and I think our IMTs in the state are great. I think any IMT would be better if they had credentialed people, and as a general rule, because that way we know everyone's gone to the specific courses, they've had the general courses, they performed in those tasks and have showed competency. And so I think in terms of our support and helping facilitate support for you, this is a big selling point for us. Also, for our area managers are on the front lines, if you will, and helping them achieve mastery in the liaison officer role is also a strategic initiative of Dustin's and the directors. I think our area managers do a wonderful job already in the liaison officer role, but continuing to develop them and to be able to leverage them in future disasters and events is key, I think, to your success and our success.
Yeah, yes, 100%. My focus is to get all 10 of them credentialed as liaison officers. If they haven't already, they're gonna be taking the liaison officer class coming up here in the very near future. We'll be working to get their recognition of prior learning, PTBs, you know, signed off and get them to where they are credentialed in those positions, because I think that's vital for you as the emergency management directors, whether that's a huge incident or it's the Clay County, you know, gas leak that was on fire, or, you know, smaller situations that we have all the time. That ability for them to understand those, you know, how they interact with that information, how they interact with you and get you the resources you need. That's what those liaison officers are there for, and that's what we want our area managers to be able to do. Many of them can do it, right? And that's what we're saying is we just want to move them into that, hey, this is that step of professionalism, right? They can say that, we can say that as we continue to move forward.
All right, gentlemen, I have a question. You may be answering this in the next section, but it just came up. So Jeff asks, if you get credentialed for a particular position on an IMT, do you then also have to get credentialed for the specific position at the EOC team?
So yes, yep, exactly. They're two different things. Those positions, and we're gonna dive into a little bit of it, so that's okay, good. I appreciate the question. We're gonna dive into it a little bit more here in Charlie's next section. But yes, those are separate credentials. Eventually, right, you're just gonna follow through with a position task book. But Dr. Harris is gonna talk about, hey, what do we do in this, as I mentioned previously, in this point where we may not have somebody who's credentialed today in those positions in the state. How are we gonna get there? So Dr. Harris is gonna go through that here in just a second. But yes, those are gonna be two separate things. But that's not to say you can't, right? You can be credentialed in multiple positions.
Absolutely.
In EOCs and IMTs. Probably recommendation is probably two or three is probably maybe the max capacity for an individual. But if it's possible for somebody to get more, they can show, hey, they've got the training and the resources, the background, the time they've spent in working towards that, you could be credentialed in multiple places.
From putting the packets together, will a lot of similar information be in both? They don't have to recreate.
Right.
So
So there'll be a little bit of recreation because things that are specific to, whatever that position is. But yeah, I mean, so like Charlie's gonna get into it. What do you gotta have to do to get qualified? 305, which is the type 3 incident management class from the fires, from NFA, National Fire Academy, EMI. That's gonna help you in every one of these positions, right? 300, 400 position specific class is gonna be specific to that. But there's gonna be a lot of things that do overlap, and we'll dive into it a whole lot more here. Good question though.
So it brings us right into, basically above the red line is IMTs and below the red line is for EOCs, but you can see sort of the courses that are required. For example, the unit leader positions are at the top, and then for each, and then the command general staff positions are the ones that have pretty much the X's for those courses. And if you look at the right-hand column, you'll see position specific. So you take those courses and that is part of your packet, is that you put the course certificates in those, or, your transcript, however you do it. And again, you can see it's the same. So there's some duplication for it, but there's some differences too, like Dustin said, but that is the educational piece that we talked about. So there's two parts, there's education and experience. So
And we probably should have planned a little better. I should have probably had a poll here. Now that I think about it, it's next. Maybe I'll stop. I won't get ahead of ourselves. I apologize.
go ahead.
So there's approximately 25, 26, 27, depends on how we define them and how they're laid out. But we want to ask, have you had any FEMA-based position-specific training? And I've listed 5 up there. This is something at the state level we have really started here, I would say in the last year and a half, 2 years. One of Dustin's main areas of emphasis is to bring this position-specific training to the Commonwealth. I think it's been going very well.
Yeah, Jennifer doesn't fight me too much on that either, so it's a pretty easy to convince her.
Oh, looks like we're, all right, so we're doing better than I thought. This is great. That's a very positive number.
So we got 24 people that have answered so far, 25, looks like 7 of 26.
Good.
9 of 28 have had it, so about 30%, give or take, have had a position-specific training.
Yeah, so again, we know that number isn't all that surprising to us. We know that we've got to work on getting it out there, and that has been an emphasis, my seat, as well as that from Jennifer's standpoint, right? Getting that training out to you guys, that and the 305, and that was the one I was thinking. I know a lot of you have had the 305 training as well, right? Those two, getting those out to you in that community. I think we had one in Western Kentucky last year, then we had another one, I think, out, if I'm not mistaken, I'm looking at Tim on my screen, I think right out there in Boyd County, at the EOC. So, obviously that can't stop, right? We got to continue to do that. We're going to have new emergency managers and new staff roll throughout our years, but getting these some of these trainings that you see, these position specific ones are vitally important to getting those out to you as well. And trust me, like I said, I don't have to fight Jennifer really hard to get her convinced that what we need there as well. And she's working towards that as well. So a lot of good things happening. We'll continue to get there. We're not, by no means are we where we want to be, but we'll continue to get there. Just one emphasis, I want to say, some of these classes are offered at EMI, so in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Just so you know, if you weren't aware, those classes are 100% free to you to go to. You can go online, you can see if it's offered if it has an E behind it, it's at Emmitsburg. That's on their campus. You pay for your flight to get there. They usually have a shuttle from the airport that they tell you to fly to Emmitsburg, to the campus. You have food for the week. There's a pretty decent dining hall. Some people are not as fond of it. I think it's pretty decent, especially for what it is. They put you up in a dormitory. It used to be an old college, I think, if I'm not, like a Catholic women's college, if I'm not mistaken, but it definitely used to be an old college of some kind. That is, and then FEMA will reimburse you. So if you sign up for those, similar to going to TEEX, similar to going to New Mexico classes that they offer, those things are all free to local emergency managers. You got to apply when and if you're accepted, then they coach you through on how to do your travel reimbursement. So I highly recommend to put yourself, if you're interested in doing this, put yourself in for those. It's a good opportunity. It's also not far from Gettysburg. It's about like 20 miles from Gettysburg. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, something a little bit to see there. Other than that, there's not a whole lot going on. So you get an opportunity to get a lot of work done.
So this is sort of just a summary. So we have our general classes, and then we'll have the specific courses, and then that equals your education requirements. So the general classes, specific classes, and if you have some interest in general classes or specific classes, then Jennifer wanted me to convey, please communicate with her, let her know. If you feel like your particular area of the state needs to have a particular course, that would be wonderful. We're going to move on. So that's kind of the education piece. And now we're going to pivot here and look at experience a little bit. And generally speaking, there's two roads to show experience. The first one is PTBs, and the second one is called historical recognition. And PTBs are kind of future oriented, and historical recognition, as the name implies, is looking into the past. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So for a PTB, someone who, say, is a recent graduate from EKU and has a job, say, as assistant emergency management official in a county and wants to join an IMT, they're new to the profession, they would be issued a PTB. And with that PTB, they would be assigned a mentor, an evaluator that would help them so they could serve on that IMT during an event or an incident and work through those tasks. So PTB is someone who's new to the field, new to a position to learn it. HR probably applies to a lot of people listening here right now. And so with historical recognition, what we're doing is we're having that person document where they have done work in a position in the past, if that makes sense. So, for example, if I've been a county emergency management official and I've handled 30 type 3 disasters in the past 10 years, giving that person a PTB is not a good thing. We don't want to do that. What we want that person to do, if they want to be certified in a certain position, is to record and get that experience of that position that they've done in those type 3 and higher disasters and show their competency. So the PTB is for someone new, and then historical recognition is for someone who's a professional in this field and has been a professional in this field a long time. And that's the vehicle where they don't have to receive a PTB and start over again. They're showing everything that they've done in the past to get credentialed.
So just to go to that, and a few of you are never going to turn your cameras on again in these meetings, so I can't pick on you. So let's go with that historical recognition, right? PTBs are not something today that KQS is ready to accept. Because in order for somebody to, if I was credentialed as a logistics section chief and Charlie is working on his PTB, if I'm already credentialed as a logs chief, I could oversee Charlie and sign off on his position task book. The challenge is if Charlie's trying to work towards his logistics section chief and there's not anybody, which is our current situation, there's not anybody who is already credentialed as a logs chief, you having a PTB doesn't do him any good. So he would still have to work through that historic recognition part of it. So in order to do the position task book part, we really got to get a group of people and hopefully a whole host of people already credentialed utilizing the historic recognition. We're going to talk a little bit about, the recognition, the historic recognition. I don't want to.
No, slides away. You're doing good. Keep going. We're the next slide.
Historic recognition. Okay. Well, I won't get ahead of us too far, but we'll talk about historic recognition and what can be done to document that as we go. But I kind of want to make that differentiation between those two things.
Folks, just want to say we're running a little bit long today. We probably have about 20 minutes more to go.
Okay.
We understand if,
My fault.
no, not at all. We understand if you need to go, we'll give you the recording, but we just have about 20 minutes more. And so I'll just stop with that and keep on going. So here's an example PTB. In case you hadn't seen a PTB, there's an admin section, and then those tasks are listed, and there's a code there in the middle column. You'll see E, F, and I. And I'll talk about that in a second, what that means. So those show how those tasks can be performed. And so, for example, like the code C means you can sit in a seminar or workshop and have someone who's already credentialed. Yeah, Charlie did that task, and circle and initial that and sign and date it. And that's fine. Some of them have to be done, like a code I have to be performed under an incident or an event managed under a type 3 or higher ICS. Now, this is a nuance here that we want to make clear on. So you have to have two PTBs, or what I'm trying to say is that you have to show each task twice. So there's going to be a series of operational periods, maybe like for the Western Kentucky tornado. I was a member, say I was a PIO there, and then I was in the Eastern Kentucky flooding. I did that again. One of those can be an exercise. So I could have whatever the code allows me in that PTB, a functional exercise or a full-scale exercise or a tabletop exercise. One of those displays of competence in that task can be during an exercise, and then one of them has to be an actual event or incident. So you have to have two demonstrations of each task, one of which on almost all PTBs can be an exercise, and then one has to be an incident or an event. So just to review there again is that we have to have two signed PTBs for certification and credentialing in any position. You have to have two, even with historical recognition as well. Now, this is a slide that Dustin wanted to speak to, and the point at the bottom in red, I think, sir, is what you want to hit on. But so in states, some states have made, maybe a mistake is not the right word, but procedurally, they have issued out PTBs to folks and haven't had evaluators or mentors who are already credentialed assigned to them, and someone else signed their PTBs. And FEMA calls that fruit from a poison tree, and that's something that we want to avoid. So we're in a situation right now where we have to build the bench. We have to build a core operations section chiefs, planning section chiefs, public information officers, safety officers, and so forth, so we can begin to issue PTBs to people who are new to the field. So we look upon you all listening today as our market, as our base, folks to engage in historical recognition and be those ones to be the evaluators and to be the coaches for the people coming in. So we have to do, logically, you have to do historical recognition first. We can't issue a PTB really to someone right now because we don't have a single mentor, we don't have a single evaluator because we don't have anyone who's credentialed at this time. Now, I want to say a couple of things. We do recognize we have reciprocity. So if someone is credentialed in Ohio as a planning section chief, we recognize them here and vice versa, because those tasks on the PTBs are national in scope. There's that, there's that national professionalism that exists. But that is our focus for this year and for next year. We'll be creating that base of evaluators and mentors, so then we can begin to train the next generation of emergency managers and emergency responders. Certainly, anything to add there on?
Nope, you hit it.
So I will deep dive a little bit. There's 3 procedures, A, B, and C, for historical recognition. And procedure A are PTBs after the event. I'll talk about that in a second. Procedure B is portfolio, C is hybrid, and each one has 6 sections in there, which are all displayed to the right. Notice there's just some, they're not very complicated, a professional resume, a background check, if you had a recent background check, that's part of the packet, or permission for the board to conduct a background check, for example. So nothing there too much. So let's talk about procedure A. I'm going to read this. With procedure A, a person uses PTBs filled out after the conclusion of events or incidences to demonstrate their competency for a specific position. Here, the evaluator for the PTB must be someone who currently enjoys credentialing in the evaluated position by a recognized AHJ and was also present at the specific event or incident. Persons may draw upon events and incidents up to 5 years, that's key, prior to the year of the submitted packet to the QRB, and may show as many incidents and events as needed to cover all of the enumerated tasks of the PTB. So say, for example, I was in the Western Kentucky tornado as an operations section chief, and there was someone from FEMA who was credentialed as a type 3 operations section chief, and they saw me perform there. So I would go to that person and said, hey, would you mind going after the fact and filling out a PTB today for what I did back then? Would you feel comfortable doing it? We can sit down and talk about it. We can go through it. So with procedure A, I will cover 2 renditions on every task because there was someone there who was already credentialed that saw me perform. And this is the easiest HR field. We probably won't have many of these, but it would be nice if we could have many of these. But this is going back after the fact, finding someone who was credentialed in that position where you served and who saw you, and asking them to fill out a PTB. Now, I sort of have the worst luck ever, so procedure B, I think, is mine. While procedure A provides a way forward for those persons who have worked an incident or event with a credentialed person, procedure B gives an option to those persons who have not. By its very nature, procedure B constitutes the most challenging and time-consuming of the 3 options. With procedure B, a person must construct a portfolio that discusses all the tasks of a given PTB. So with procedure B, and I'm going to show an example here. Sorry, my finger hit the clicker there. We're going to show, what I have to do is, as Dustin mentioned earlier, I'm going to bring up that task. I'm going to talk about how I did that task. During, say I was a public information officer, hey, I created press releases for the local community. I work with local officials. I'm going to talk about what I did in a couple sentences for each task.
And so what you would do in that case is you would include an incident action plan that says what your position was at that event. You might include some of, if we're talking PIO, you had to pick PIO, Charlie. You're a PIO. Some of the press releases that you, maybe some copies of those press releases that you provided during that incident. Just, maybe you had a mayor, a judge executive, or just another person who was with you on that team and said, hey, yeah, I saw David Davis do these things, and you might write a little paragraph, a letter, or whatever, and they may sign it saying, yes, I saw David do X, Y, and Z. We know that doesn't, David isn't necessary, or I wouldn't in that case be credentialed to see David do that, but somebody can kind of vouch that, yeah, David did those things at those incidents. We encourage you, and we're going to dive into this. We encourage you to document every event you do. And that goes definitely from here on out. But previously, keep some documentation of what you're doing. Because a lot of the stuff you guys are doing, it's just a matter of having the documentation there to back it up and then putting it together in a portfolio or in a book. So continue there. I'm sure we'll dive more into that.
Oh, absolutely. And so, and then with procedure C is a hybrid. Maybe I have one PTB that's filled out, but it didn't give me two, renditions of every task. So I will have to do that portfolio thing and talk about that other disaster I was at and what I did. So I have two, for each task. I think Dustin brought up a wonderful point. Any sort of evidence that you can provide is great. So say, for example, the incident commander said, hey, you did a great job as the PIO. Thank you so much. That would be great. And a memorandum from the operations section chief that said, yes, Charlie Harris served as a PIO during this incident and did a great job and met all the tasks in the PTB. That's another submission. I just want to say the standard here is a reasonable person standard. If the board will look at, would a reasonable person reading your packet think that you are competent and have showed mastery of those tasks? That's all it is. It's not that you're an expert in it or anything like that. It's just, have you displayed competency? Would a reasonable person believe that? So in my mind, if someone had, for example, had a narrative where they talked about each task in their PTB for a couple sentences, and then had letters of support from the IC, the commanders of where they served, for example, and maybe some ICS forms that show that they were assigned that position, all that to me would be a very strong case. So, and C's a hybrid, as I mentioned before, we just not enough PTBs being filled out, so we have to do a little bit of that myself. So here's an example right here. This is for a public information officer. I did this because David Davis is sitting with us today. So this is all about ensure readiness for assignment. That really is the behavior there, and there's 3 supporting tasks for that behavior in this PTB. So I'm going to read this. Considering tasks 1 through 3, I served in 2 Type 3 incidents in the past 5 years, specifically the Northern Kentucky tornado in 2023 and the Big Sandy fire in 2021. Let me say those are made up. Before, during, and after these 2 incidents, I maintained a go kit of things I would need to when I deployed. I kept most of these items at my work in deployment bags in a locker, both of which I purchased for this purpose. I used a flyer I found at a workshop as a checklist for my go kit, and I've included it as Exhibit A. I usually deployed with a nice suit too, and this is not mentioned in the checklist. For both incidents, I arrived at the right place and time, even a bit early on occasions, and checked in following our incident management team's SOP. So when you read that and you look at it, you're like, hey, it looks to me like, yeah, he's got that piece down. So that's what we're talking about within there. We're not talking about War and Peace. We're not talking about writing an essay or anything. We're talking about, putting a couple of sentences together to address tasks underneath each behavior that's in a PTB. And all the behaviors in PTBs are in italicized. They're italicized, and then they're in bold, as you see right in that one from a PIO. So do you do A, B, or C? You need to go back to think about what disasters or events that you worked at, incidents or events. And then was there anyone there that was already credentialed who saw you perform in your position? And I would, because that procedure A, just submitting 2 PTBs is so much easier than writing, B or C, the hybrid. So I would do that first. But that's kind of the first decision that you have to make is which procedure do I do for historical recognition? A couple of things when you submit your packet, signatures must be wet and scanned, and then you send that packet to training at KYEM, and then we're the ones that send it to the QRB and track it all the way through. The QRB may ask you for an interview, but we sort of think, we haven't processed a single one yet, but we think that's probably an unusual thing that the most packets will say enough on their own. And now we're to really the summary and the questions and answers. We really appreciate any question that you have. And I just want to say that you don't have to do this again. Once you get credentialed in the position, the only thing that you need to submit thereafter to the QRB, and Dustin, I may not have the form right, but it'd be like an ICS form 225. Is that
25.
220? It would be a 225. You'd say, hey, look, I want to be credentialing is good for 5 years. And you would need to perform in that position in that 5-year period and receive a positive evaluation on your 225, then you would submit that back to the board. And then the board would reissue another credential for another 5 years. So you won't ever have to do this again. If that is helpful in some respects, once you get credentialed, you are credentialed. And if you go to Tennessee, you are credentialed. If you go to Florida, you are credentialed. And then in 5 years, there has to be a type 3 or higher incident where you serve in that position and get an ICS form 225. And then that is that's pretty much your sole packet for recertification and recredential.
Yeah.
So what questions?
So why, David, you got one, David? Nope. So while we're just talking, and if you're thinking of questions, please don't hesitate to put them in there. But yeah, again, the emphasis here is to provide you guys with a path forward and how you can get credentialed. And, if you have that desire to be deployable, outside the state, as we work to form incident management teams from a state perspective that respond out of state, obviously you can be a candidate for that. That this is not, you are not required to do this in order to support inside the state. But we will be required if you ever want to be deployed outside of the state. Again, I want to emphasize, and I think I've emphasized this before, but I want to emphasize it again. Kentucky Emergency Management is not going to qualify incident management teams or EOC assistance teams. We are going to credential individuals. So you being on a team, and if a team requires credentialing, we would credential you. You would submit an application or whatever the process may be to be a part of that team, if that's their requirements. So we are just gonna look at qualifying you as an individual in a particular position or in multiple positions that you submit for. One thing, if you're asking, if you wanna be on multiple positions, you gotta submit a task or a packet for each one of those positions.
I got a couple questions coming in, so I have somebody that just wants to make sure that training is happening across the state. Some budgets don't allow for travel, especially from one side of the state to the other, so please make sure that training is happening across the state, so we get that. And then Jeff has asked, you mentioned other states requesting credentialed positions from Kentucky. Are there specific positions needed more than others in our region?
Right, so I will say the command and general staff, right, are gonna be your top 8 typically. And then you start to get into that communications, resource unit, situation unit, documentation. Those are probably your top 12 as they come to mind. But again, understand that it's vitally important for us to have folks at those unit leader. I think sometimes it's thought of, well, unit leader, a resource unit leader is not as favorable as a plan section chief. Though the plan section chief is responsible for a resource unit leader, a lot of times a plan section chief is going to be too busy to do both of those jobs, and you got to have a resource unit leader. So some of those unit leader positions are just as important as a section chief position or an officer position that you see in the command and general staff, because somebody still has to take that up. And, in the resource unit leader position, it's vitally important that we track resources using, T cards or whatever other systems somebody might be using, tracking, obtaining, planning for those resources, working with logistics. Communications is usually one that's asked about a lot. So the ComL or ComT. Then we also dive into, some of those other support branch and supply branch units in logistics. Those are pretty important as well. So that would kind of be my top ones there from an EOC standpoint. Again, command, general staff, your ops and your section chief and officer positions, as well as documentation, situation unit, resource unit. Those are going to be huge. Any other question? Anything you could?
No, sir. No,
Yeah.
good. No, excellent.
That's all I have in the
That's all I
chat.
have.
Any other questions? No.
So again, it looks like we held most of them past the 5 minutes, so that's huge. I appreciate everybody sticking with us. But if you have questions that come up later, send those to Charlie. Here's our email addresses. You can send them to me too, I don't care a bit, but send them to Charlie or I, and we will definitely answer those questions to the best of our ability. We want this to work. This is something that even before I started working here at KYEM has been vitally important. To me, we've continued to push it. Charlie's done a great job of getting this way down the road, much quicker than most others anticipated it would happen. So it's been a big task, but it's been really good. It's gonna be good for the state.
All right, folks, thank you for joining us today. I will put a recording of this video on the KYEM YouTube page. I will send out a follow-up email. It'll probably be about a week and a half before I get the video finished. I will send out a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording. And other than that, thank you for coming. It was a great presentation, gentlemen, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Great participation. We appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.